Replay modes are revolutionary to gaming, and a lot of games that employ replay modes have been able to pull off some incredible stuff. For example, those Call of Duty montages that you see, those Halo Infinite montages that you see, cinematic showcases of dinosaurs, whether that's from the developers and stuff like that, seems to have been made through replay modes. And that's why I think when it comes to the game, for everybody, it's going to be a huge benefit for server owners, content creators, and everybody in general, because it opens the door to an additional creative outlet that will be able to be used massively. Today we're going to be talking about the replay mode and what we could expect in it, kind of diving through what the latest screenshot for the replay mode showcases. Anyways, let's talk about the replay mode and what we can expect and break it down. So firstly, the replay mode, we've seen two iterations of it so far. We've seen the first one, which is the old one, which looks very bare bones, very clunky. The UI wasn't really fleshed out, which was showcased in December. Here it is on the screen now. This is the old replay mode, and now we have the new replay mode that has a very fleshed out screen. A lot of new buttons have arrived and a lot more depth to be able to do what you want to do in the replay mode. And this is the image that we'll be basing off the breakdown and what you will be able to do. So let's just start off with this main screen here. There are two things that you'll be able to see when you are in the replay mode, which is when you have it paused, you'll be able to see obviously the replay mode settings and of course the dinosaurs that you're able to see in the replay mode. Looking at the dinosaur as well, looking exactly at that dinosaur, it looks like you'll be able to move the camera around in a free cam mode as well, because that camera position is a very unnatural one. That being said, at the top you also have old replay. Now I don't know what that means. I assume maybe you're able to go on replays that are older game versions, and so you'd use an older replay mode to get access to that older replay. I'm not too sure. Then of course you've got settings, minimize and close, and I think close probably just closes the replay. That being said, there are additional buttons here, which are the spawn small fish, next fish type, and reset to default and view all. Now spawn small fish, looks like you'll be able to spawn a fish in during replay mode. Small fish as in most likely the shader fish, I'm assuming, rather than an AI, because an AI added into a replay mode might be a bit silly. Reset to default probably just resets all of your changes to default. Moving on, you've got the player focus. So the first obviously example is they're focused on Jiggy, and then you have the option to follow them as well. So following them most likely just takes you to them and then maybe locks the camera to them. Now I'm not too sure how this one will work. It'll probably either be where you're able to lock the camera or it's just a locked camera replay, kind of like in World of Tanks, which has a replay mode where you are specifically locked on to that dinosaur and then you can switch between dinosaurs as well, but you're still locked on. If that's the case, that will be a shame, but I can see why it happens. That being said, moving on, there is a lot of other stuff here. Firstly, you've got different camera settings that you can tweak, which are camera, aberration, depth of field, exposure, and rendering. We'll come back to that in a second. However, I also want to note out the bottom part of this, which is playback speed and its own section. So firstly, you can adjust the playback speed, whether that is slowing it down, speeding it up, kind of stuff there. So you'll be able to put stuff in fast motion or slow motion, however you deem fit. And then you have the usual buttons for replaying, pausing, play, skip, and stop, as well as going back to the start and going to the very end, which is nice to know. Then below that, there's a timeline of the replay, and it looks like you may be able to flick through it. I'm not too sure there. Maybe you'll just be able to use the buttons to skip ahead or fast forward your speed and go backwards, kind of stuff. That might be the idea there. However, what interests me the most is the fact that you'll be able to adjust the time of day by the looks of it. At the bottom, they've got a notice that says the time of day. Obviously, that will probably be when the replay took place. However, below that, you also have the weather type. And then below that again, you can set or reset weather, which will probably reset it to default, but you can set it so if you change a setting in the weather, it then sets it as that new weather that you have. So, for example, you're filming in the daytime, it's clear sky, maybe you can adjust it to then be the night time, but obviously in the rain. That would be really cool, and then you can reset that to default. Then you have the option to freeze time and weather, so maybe that freezes the time and freezes the weather, so the weather doesn't change at all, going with how the replay works. That'll be another nice feature as well if that is the case there. Then after that, at the bottom, you've got show name tags, and that's pretty much the main screen that we're able to infer from the replay mode. However, there are some other stuff that I do want to talk about, and that is the camera settings and the camera stuff, so let's talk about that now. So with the camera settings, there are 4 different options that you can change that are very obvious to us, and we know by the looks of this screenshot definitely come into the replay mode. Firstly, the field of view, which is basically something where you can change how focused the camera is, so how zoomed in it is or zoomed out it is. A further and larger field of view means you're getting more in your screenshot from that same exact point. It's not moving the camera, just increasing the view range of it. This is evident in NVIDIA Ansel, which you could check out and do if you do have an NVIDIA Ansel ability on your computer. That being said, there are also settings to the aperture which change it. So you've got aperture, max aperture, a number of diaphragm blades. These are all to do with the aperture, and essentially aperture is the lens's diaphragm through which light passes. So when you increase the aperture, you're increasing that diaphragm. When you increase the diaphragm blades, that increases the amount of blade that the light will pass through as well. You can also use this to change depth of field. There are some good examples about aperture, which is on Nikon's USA website, which is of course, camera company. And so, yeah, that's probably where the best example for that is. And yeah, now we get into the more theoretical stuff, where you look at aberration, depth of field, exposure, and rendering. Firstly, with aberration is basically caused or usually due to a defect in a lens design, which causes light to spread out instead of focusing. So essentially, when you're changing the aberration, it looks like you'll be able to change the spread of the light, which could also blur the image slightly. However, maybe, just hopefully, you'll be able to do this, which I'm doing in my editing software. This is chromatic aberration, where you're separating the reds, the greens, and the blues in different directions, which causes some cool effects. Hopefully, that's something that you'd be able to do in Path of Titans' replay mode. It looks like, yes, there is the aberration setting there, but we don't know if a chromatic aberration is in that. I do believe Draconia's replay mode, or photo mode in Draconia, has chromatic aberration, so it's not really something that they can't do, but it's something we don't know is visible or evident just yet. Next up is the depth of field. Now, depth of field, I love it, we all love it, especially all of you people who love to take nice fancy pictures. This is basically where you change the blur of your image, the depth of the field, making images look blurrier if they're in the background or in the foreground as well, making either or pop. So it allows you to adjust the camera from, say, if you're focusing on something right in front of you, you can then focus it on something behind that, which then blurs the thing right in front of you, or vice versa, which is something that I really hope you can do in this replay mode, because if you're able to adjust the depth of field like that, maybe if you're able to adjust it in real time, you could have some kind of effects like in nature documentaries, where you're focused on the foreground, then you shift that focus to the background as well. And that can add up to some really cool scenes where you've got a dinosaur stalking in the background, where you can then focus on that from the focus of what's in the foreground, which would be awesome. That being said, there are some other stuff. For example, on NVIDIA Ansel, you've got focus depth, you've got far blur curve, near blur curve, and depth radius. Now, these are all the stuff you can change on NVIDIA Ansel. They change it in different ways, where some of them would basically adjust the curve on the blur for what's in the background and what's closer to the camera as well, and you can adjust it that way. Hopefully that's an idea of what we could see in the depth of field for the replay mode. It would be nice if that is the case when it comes to the replay mode here, because NVIDIA Ansel's depth of field system is really nicely well made, and you can create some really nice screenshots with it, especially when you know what you're doing with blur. Exposure and rendering are two things I don't know much about, so I don't know how they'll play out in the game's replay mode system. Firstly, exposure, to break it down, is essentially actually quite easy to talk about. When you increase the exposure the camera's sense has while it's to light. So obviously on a camera, you increase the exposure and the image becomes lighter. You decrease the exposure, the image becomes darker. This is probably what exposure will be when it comes to the replay mode in Path of Titans. Now, rendering is an interesting one, because that's pretty much editing the image while you are obviously in the camera. So you'll be editing the replay's look while you are in the replay mode itself, rather than going into an editing software and doing it. However, I'm not too sure what this will be editing. It's obviously not 3D editing and just soft stuff on the camera itself, probably shadows and stuff like that. However, I'm not too sure, because rendering is one of those interesting things where you can do some really weird stuff in some photo modes and on Premiere Pro, Photoshop and Video Ansel. There's a lot of weird stuff you can do with rendering, and I don't know how the developers are going to do it. However, I do think shadows and color stuff may be what that rendering is. I'm not too sure with that one exactly, but it's nice to know that they have rendering, and I am very curious on how that will play out. But regarding the replay mode and what we could decipher from the image that we have there was actually a lot to unpack. Mainly what you could tell is coming, and then what you could infer of what we know is coming. So from the hints that we have, exposure, the other camera settings like aberration, rendering and all that, you can kind of infer and guess what's coming from there, because a lot of other tools like Nvidia Ansel, Draconia's photo mode, World of Tanks' replay system, Halo Infinite's replay system, they all have those features to a lesser extent or to a greater extent. And I feel like what Path of Titans might be trying to do is phase out Nvidia Ansel. We saw that they can't do still photos in Nvidia Ansel anymore, so maybe your photos will be coming from Nvidia Ansel by going into replay mode and then pausing it that way and going through the replay mode procedures that way, instead of doing it live with Nvidia Ansel. So maybe it's gonna try and replicate Nvidia Ansel. We don't actually know. All we know is that Nvidia Ansel can't properly be used on multiplayer anymore. Replay mode is getting closer, and of course this is what we know could be coming in replay mode in the future when it releases, judging by this image that we've seen from it. Let me know, are you excited for the replay mode? I know it's going to open a door for everyone. Can't wait to see the nature documentaries, the brand new videos that people are going to make, the cinematic shots, the admin tools, the help via admin tools, and stuff that I'll be able to utilize from it as well. It's going to be very cool. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day. Peace.